del Plata conference, when the U.S. government was very influential in promoting the International Drinking Water and Sanitation Decade, the decade of the 1980s. And USAID and the U.S. government, the State Department, had a major prominent role at that time. As the decade advanced, interest within the U.S. government dropped. And in the 1990s, the U.S. government was progressively losing staff, closing down or not expanding new water and sanitation programs. At that time, I was with the United Nations, and the U.S. really didn't participate in international cooperative efforts in the water and sanitation sector. They had their own projects, but they weren't involved with the rest of the world. And so they didn't have the influence that they had in the past. By the year 2000, water and sanitation had become almost a non-activity in USAID. There was some water work going on, but very little addressing the issues of safe drinking water and basic sanitation to people, especially in poor countries. And then in 2005, it was as if the 4th of July and Christmas and all sorts of holidays happened with the passage of the Water for the Poor Act, the Paul Simon Water for the Poor Act of 2005. And this was a wonderful time for those of us in the sector. We saw a new era coming, a new era of greater activism on the part of the U.S. government, greater leadership, greater influence on not only the various organizations within the U.S., but throughout the world, foreign governments, other donors, foundations, the UN agencies, and so on. Unfortunately, the Water for the Poor Act, which had a lot of very important aspects in it, had only limited meaningful progress over the past 5 years. And whereas the act was intended to create a strategy for water and sanitation within the State Department, where it was intended to emphasize high priority countries, especially the poorest countries in greatest need, and where it was intended to emphasize a variety of issues related to poverty, poverty reduction, local ownership of facilities, community-based approaches, leveraging financial capacity of local groups, increased involvement of the non-governmental and private sectors in the U.S. These things did not happen as had been hoped. And the problems we see over the past few years is there was a lack of strategic planning on the part of USAID. They still have not come up with this long-term strategy that the Water for the Poor Act called for. There was difficulty integrating water and sanitation into a wider area of international development and into other sectors. There was too little capacity established within the State Department and USAID. USAID had almost no people with expertise in this area. They were slowly building them up, but not sufficient to meet the needs of the Water for the Poor Act. And so if you don't have the horses, you don't pull the wagon. And water and sanitation did not advance as quickly as it should have because there weren't the personnel within state and within USAID to do it. And also, countries of greatest need did not always get priority attention when U.S. government programs were being developed. So this act, the new act, Water for the World, is intended to be part and parcel of the Water for the Poor Act, to supplement it, to strengthen it, and bring it forward to full implementation. Now, why is the Water for the World Act important? It does a number of things. One of the most obvious that one sees immediately, it calls for a target of serving 100 million people by the year 2015. It calls for full implementation of the Water for the Poor activities. It reaffirms what the Water for the Poor Act said, that the Millennium Development Goal, Target 10, of providing, fulfilling that goal for water and sanitation is an official policy of the U.S. government. And that is the policy. And it's the only MDG that has ever been accepted as official by the U.S. government. But the need continues to exist. One can find all sorts of statistics to show the problems there. Often it's said there are some 900 million people on this planet that do not have access to safe drinking water. Also, 2.5 billion do not have access to an adequate means of disposing of their bodily wastes. And these figures are really underestimates, because I know 20 years ago, as head of water and sanitation in WHO, my agency and UNICEF worked to develop the monitoring program, which still is the most quoted monitoring program for global statistics. The problems are particularly acute in sub-Saharan Africa, whereas in the developed world, the industrialized world, water and sanitation services reach generally 100% of the population. In the developing world, all the countries outside of Europe, North America, and Japan, the water and sanitation services reach 84%. Water reaches 84%, sanitation reaches 52%. But if we look at the area of sub-Saharan Africa, water reaches 60%, sanitation reaches 31%. And if one looks at the rural areas, the areas that the Water for the Poor Act specifically said were the targets of its concern, rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa have only 40% access to safe drinking water, 24% access to sanitation. Countries such as Ethiopia, Mali, Niger have less than 25% of their populations having the ability to get a safe drink of water. Other countries, Madagascar, Ghana, Mozambique, less than 15% have a way to have a safe means of going to the toilet. These are crucial things. One can argue it's probably the major public health with the combination of national economic development and global security issue in the world. My organization, Catholic Relief Service, is one of many NGOs that work in this area. We're a big organization, but our water program is not that big, although it's growing. We've been encouraged by the Water for the Poor Act, and so we have been ramping up our efforts to take advantage of the momentum that the Water for the Poor Act has created. We have activities, water and sanitation activities in 40 countries, and we serve with water and sanitation improvements millions of people every year. And also we try very hard to integrate water and sanitation into other programs, into HIV/AIDS, into cholera control, into food security issues, agriculture, education. So while there are standalone water projects, increasingly we see it as an integrated aspect of development, especially in the poor countries. But what we really need is leadership from the U.S. government, because when the U.S. government leads, that sets the tone. It indicates to the various stakeholders that these are important issues. And so what we need is the U.S. government to articulate goals and targets. We need them to access resources. We need them to participate in assessments and discussions and strategy formulation. It's very interesting because at this point in time, there has never been as much involvement of the non-governmental, private sector, commercial organizations, and foundations as there are now. Organizations such as those put up by Gates, Buffett, Case, Hilton, and many, many small foundations are very active in water and sanitation, much more than ever before. Similarly, there are many private commercial firms that are very active. Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, and others are increasingly developing their own humanitarian or foundation arms to promote water and sanitation. So we have an opportunity here, but the U.S. really is the catalyst that puts all these things together. It can raise awareness, it can stimulate interest, and it can promote partnerships. There's a synergy here. So let me just conclude by saying, I don't see this at this point as a funding issue. Of course, we always need money. Who doesn't? But this is an issue of leadership. And the U.S. government has an opportunity at this point in time to bring in participation, involvement, and encouragement of all the stakeholders who are concerned with WASH services. In effect, this is the leadership role that we would like to see. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Let me ask the panel, and Dr. Warner, you may be the proper person, there may be somebody else on the panel. First, a question just comes to me. I remember some years ago when I was with Dean Kamen, who is an inventor. He invented the Segway. And he was talking that his next major effort, I believe, was going to be some type of purification process. Dr. Is it McGay? Can you help me with my memory on this issue and what has happened with that project?
Just briefly, I was involved about a year and a half ago with a project that was working with Dean on that. What happened with it at the end point is it was too technologically sophisticated for where he wanted to go with it. That's it. There's a very sort of now famous photograph of that device in a small health center, I think in Guatemala, was surrounded by air fans because it just ran too hot to work in a tropical climate. So that's where that particular one went. Dean is still promoting the idea, and I think that he's on to something. But as I said before, the technology is not the issue. I think Dean is onto something clever. He's also looking at the business model around commercializing the operation of that technology that he's developing. That leads to the sustainability of the investment in the technology. One of the points that I made in the opening comments is our high level of knowledge on how to do these programs. We have the technologies, we have the techniques, we have innovators like Dean and all these organizations that Dr. Warner referred to who are coming to the sector. And there's a catalytic effort that I think that we could play. But it feeds back to what Dr. Warner was saying about the lack of leadership within the U.S. government to take advantage of these sort of innovations that are out there because we don't have a program and we don't have a strategy.
And either you or Dr. Warner was mentioning some other countries, the Dutch and the British, was it, that have been involved in some of these efforts internationally. Have the Chinese been involved? I say, have the Chinese been involved?
The Chinese have not yet begun participating actively in the water and sanitation sector with the other international and national organizations. They may in the future, they're not yet now.
It does seem as the Chinese are so active in Africa and other places trying to secure friends through deeds and obviously water. I refer, and I think I mentioned to the chairman, my father was a physician and his pharmacology professor 70 years ago or so, Dr. Michelson at UT, had one standard that he taught my father, who passed it to me for what it's worth, and it was that water internal, water external, water eternal. And water is, I mean, what percentage are we water? 96? What percent? We're pretty high water content, and it's a great elixir. And it's the first thing I wanted when I came in, and indeed, and the kidney stone that I'm having is probably as a result not of having enough. But anyway, I yield back. Thank you.
Did anyone want to add a comment to the questions raised by Steve Cohen? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say that in my organization and in previous organizations I've worked with, there are many people that come to show us a product or a technology or a device that they have developed, and they would like us or our partner organizations to adopt them. Almost without exception, all of these devices and technologies work in the workshop, in the laboratory, wherever they've been developed. Rarely are they successful in the field, where people have to accept them, adopt them, use them properly, and feel it is part of their life. And so the fact that one hears about a new process to do something and wonders why hasn't it been accepted by everyone doesn't answer the question. The issue is it's difficult to get it accepted in the field.
I'd like to just make a brief comment in following up on what Dr. Warner said. If the objective is saving the lives and reducing the debilitation of diarrheal diseases in these children under 5, drinking water is one relatively minor part of the issue. There are 3 aspects that we have to think about as professionals in this field. One is the hardware and the technology. One is hygiene promotion. People need to take better care of themselves. This is how all of us stay healthy when we go into these types of settings.
But they're not able to.
And that's partly because they don't have the funds, or they don't have the products, or they don't have the knowledge and understanding.
Well, if you don't have the water, that ends it right there. You could have the knowledge and the will and motivation, but is this a catch-22 situation we're describing?
I don't think of it that way. I think that they are interlinked. Supplying the water is not enough. Just emphasizing hygiene is not enough. The water, the sanitation, the hygiene, and the social structures for sustainability, be it a business plan around Dean Common or be it community management of facilities, those are the 3 elements. And we've proven time and time and time again that you can develop programs that successfully integrate those to comprehensively address the ultimate problem, which is the diarrheal disease reduction.
Subcommittee Chair Hank Johnson of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You asked a question that I really wanted some follow-up on, but Dr. McGahey, if you could be a little more specific about what needs to take place once you have technology in place. I mean, technology is no problem in this area. There are many ways of providing safe drinking water and providing a safe way of disposing of wastes from human beings. Can you be a little more specific about what needs to take place in order for these technologies to be adopted in any particular locale?
I'll start with one sentence and then I'll kind of dissect that a little bit. What needs to happen is the social structure needs to be in place to use that technology regularly, every day, by the father, by the mother, by the young children, by the school children. And that social structure can be a small rural community and their decision-making processes. They need to understand the technological innovation which is coming to them. They need to want it, and they need to be part of it. And that's the social development side of professional international.
But Dr. McGahey, most of them don't have it. They can want it all they want. I mean, if you've got 10 or 15% of the people that only have access to water, what difference does it? What does motivation have to do with it? What do you do when when the water that the women are carrying in these large jugs on their heads for miles is all diseased water to begin with?
It's actually a very simple, and I hope you won't take it as too simple answer to that question. Communities know what they want. The example of this woman, she knows that she wants something better. The opportunity we have is to provide that something better in the context of her life. So we have a major role to play in providing her something better that fits with her life and the way that she makes decisions, so that we can address the number of problems that water and sanitation can address. Does that address your question, Mr. Chairman?
Well, let's see what Jay So has to say about this question, and then I'll yield to the subcommittee chair.
Thank you. I think what I'd like to add to what Dr. McKay's remarks is that what is missing...
Pull your mic a little closer, please. No, pull it closer, really.
Closer. Is this loud enough? Great. I'd like to add to Dr. McGahy's points by talking about the knowledge that's needed. A project that we're doing in Africa shows that we can actually provide water purification tablets at the well or at the house. So there are two options for a household to actually purify the water that they bring from the wells. But there is a difference in behavior and possibly use of these purification tablets, whether you do it in the privacy of your home or whether you do it in front of other people. So there's a lot of knowledge about how to change behaviors to take advantage of new technologies.
But you know, you're sounding like that it's all there and available and they're just choosing not to use it. You know, this sounds like the victim is at fault for the fact that the water isn't too available, that clean water, they're not taking advantage. You and Dr. McGahy both described wonderful things that do not exist.
That do not exist.
Almost do not. I mean, for the majority of people in the countries that Dr. Warner named off, they haven't refused to take pills. They don't have any. Right?
They don't have it at scale. If we're going to reach the Millennium Development Goals, then we have to look for at national scale, the availability of these tools and knowledge.
Well, sure. I mean, we wouldn't be here if not. And that's what the genius of the Paul Simon bill that we're trying to get through the House is all about. But still, you know, I get the impression from the discussion so far that people aren't taking advantage of what they have. You talked about the pills. What percentage of the people in the countries that we're naming have, how many pills exist in Haiti? Not one. None. So what are you talking about? You're talking about what we ought to do. And you're a witness because I want you to talk about how we get to what it is that we all want, or help us get to do what we have to do. Dr. Warner.
Mr. Chairman, let me use an example I sometimes use when I'm addressing students at universities, particularly engineering students. These technologies that one hears about, they work. But development is not technology. Development, I compare it to an equation with maybe 1,000 variables in it. And we know maybe a half a dozen of those variables and how to control them. The rest are difficult. They're attitudes, behaviors, the effect of the environment, the heritage of the people, the ethnic tensions. And so to put all those things together in a development project and have it work is extremely difficult. We can put in a hand pump. I believe that most hand pumps existing in the world today do not work. They don't work because people have misused them. They don't know how to repair them. They have no system for buying spare parts. They believe that the government or the NGO that put in that hand pump should be responsible to pay for it, not them. So there are so many issues here. And here's where a major organization like the U.S. government through its development agencies is so important, because it can put these pieces together and tell its stakeholders, the partners that work with it, you have to consider all of these things. That's the only way we can increase the success rate of development projects. We're not doing technology projects. We're doing development, trying to change people's lives.
Subcommittee Chairman Hank Johnson of Georgia.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on that point because, again, it's not the technology, it's not the ability to provide drinking water, safe drinking water, and eliminate wastes. It's a matter, it's more complicated than that. And so, Dr. McGahey, you were talking about the social structure being in place, and I think that can everyone agree that that is a fundamental problem that needs to be solved, the social, putting that social structure in place? And if that is the case, how can we do that? And that's just one of the three elements that you were mentioning.
I would rephrase your question just a little bit. We don't usually need to put the social structure in place. Usually it's already there. We need to understand it so that we can make the best application of the technology to the existing social structure. Communities function. Communities know how to make decisions. Communities know how to organize themselves. They know how to raise funds. So it's not usually a matter of externally putting something in, but it's being sensitive to understanding what's there, and then our investment through the technology can come in to address the chairman's issue on what it is that we can bring to these people that they don't have access to, can't reach, can't get a hold of with their own resources, their own energy, their own funds.
Ms. So, you had anything you wanted to add to that, or Dr. Warner?
We absolutely agree that it's really being able to develop a customized support to each of these communities and each of these countries, because the issues that they're facing are unique to each country. And the study, we've just completed a study which will be released next month in a 32-country overview of the progress of water and sanitation in sub-Saharan Africa. And we see great disparities among these 32 countries. Some countries have made excellent progress. And these are the...
It just seems okay if we just take it down to a micro level as opposed to a macro, and decided to install pilot projects in a certain country, given the differences within that country, and you make your pilot projects to fit the mindset and the conditions within a particular country, or even just a small village, a couple of small villages. Does the World Bank do that now?
The World Bank doesn't do small-scale pilot projects, but in fact, this sector
Does it do large-scale?
Yes. And in fact, this sector is filled with small-scale pilot projects that never get scaled up at the national level. And I think one of the potential impacts of the Water for the World Act could be to really work at national level with these countries, using the knowledge from small-scale pilots on what works and what doesn't work. Each of these governments that have been mentioned by the two other panelists in this sector have funded many different types of pilot projects, some of them successful, some of them unsuccessful.
Has there been a focus on one particular country? Let's just say Haiti, or let's just take Haiti, for instance, because I do assume that the World Bank is involved in Haitian affairs from a monetary or from a fiscal policy standpoint, I guess, loans and that kind of thing. Has there ever been a World Bank initiative in Haiti where American policy provides $450,000 for cholera prevention per year, a measly, meager sum? Why is it that conditions like that can exist so close to America and the World Bank, the UN, Red Cross, American government? Why is it that we have not eradicated this situation in Haiti? And what is on the agenda for solving the issue down there from a World Bank perspective?
Thank you for mentioning Haiti. In fact, the situation in Haiti is much worse than how you have described it. Almost exactly 1 month after the earthquake in Haiti, we started to hear from National Public Radio reports of cholera outbreaks. And that's because in emergency relief, everybody thought about providing clean water. People did not think about providing sanitation facilities. And now cholera has returned to Haiti in over 100 years, the first time. And 1,000 people have died from cholera in Haiti. And now cholera is risking to be spread to the Dominican Republic and other neighboring countries. So in fact, it's not whether we have steadily made progress, but why, if it's so basic knowledge that we need water and sanitation, when we go into disaster relief, do we not recognize the need for sanitation? We think there is still much need for sharing the knowledge and information with everybody in the sector. The World Bank has absolutely been engaged in Haiti, but as you know, the primary mandate of the World Bank is not disaster relief. So that is left to the Red Cross and other global leaders. But the World Bank has absolutely been involved in the reconstructive efforts, where, of course, sanitation and hygiene and rebuilding institutions has been a prime component of our support.
I think the case of Haiti, as well as one can see in many other poor, failed states, some of which are in sub-Saharan Africa, is the fact that a sector by itself does not transform a country, no matter how much investment is put into that sector. So water and sanitation by itself will not turn a country into a place with a good level of living for everyone. It's essential. But here's where development is so interrelated. Development cannot happen in a vacuum. It must be part of other related activities, the building of democratic institutions, the sense of people establishing a feeling of ownership for the activities around them, a sense of responsibility to do something about it. It's not a problem for some outside entity to come in and build a lot of infrastructure, put in a lot of wells, put in a lot of water tanks, and so on. You could almost bet your salary on the fact that 2 years later you come back and all those things will be broken if there has been no attempt to help the people be involved in the decision-making and the implementation of these activities. It has to be part of their life, not some outside entity. And here is where an organization like the U.S. government, through the State Department and USAID, can integrate water sanitation with its other development activities, health, agriculture, governance, and so on. It's all part of a very big picture. I'm sorry, there's no simple answer on that. If it was simple, I think we wouldn't be sitting here today.
May not be simple, but it's got to be doable.
It's doable.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. It is absolutely doable, and I think to sort of broaden your question out, I think Haiti is a tragic microcosm which is going on right now. But you could ask the same question of why haven't we been positioned to respond to this global crisis, which has really manifested itself close to our shores in Haiti. And that revolves back to part of what Dr. Warner said. We, the U.S. government, have dismantled our internal response structure to the point that when an immediate critical crisis like Haiti arises, we have no response mechanism. We have too few professionals, we have too few resources, and we have too big of a problem. This was resuscitated to a certain degree with the passage of the Senator Paul Simon Water for the Poor Act. And that's why I feel very strongly about urging the passage of the Water for the World Act to raise those resources back up and allow us to reestablish the internal skill set so that when the Haitis of the world happen, we have a mechanism to respond to it, which we don't have right now. And this is solvable. We do know the techniques. We just don't have the human resources and infrastructure to respond.
We've been joined by the distinguished gentlewoman from Texas, Sheila Jackson Lee, and I'd like to recognize her at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm delighted to join yourself and colleague from Memphis, Mr. Cohen, and my colleague from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, and others who may have be on their way for this passionate and needed briefing. And I benefited from the opportunity to listen to the inquiry of Mr. Johnson and Chairman Conyers. And I don't know how much more Chairman Conyers has in him, but I assume that if we are here on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day or next week, we'll have a hearing that expresses his compassion and his sensitivity to these issues. I'd like the record to reflect that this is a fitting conclusion for not only this term, but temporary conclusion for this chairman, that this committee, with its highest ideals of protecting the laws of this nation and the Constitution, has the kind of chairman that is willing to dig down into the annals of the earth, or dig down into the, if you will, unattractive areas. And this water question is enormous. Let me quickly just raise these points. Let me ask everyone to tell me, what is the magnitude of death? How many people will probably die? And just give me your guesstimate without the right kind of action on water access across the world. I'll go down if you start, Mr. Magani.
1.8 million children under the age of 5 this year. 5,000 will die today.
Okay. And so we would say 5 billion plus in 5 years. As you said this year?
1.8 million per.
You said million, I'm sorry.
Million, yeah. When you said billion, you scared me.
No, you said million.
1.8 million children under the age of 5.
Okay, so you're estimating that about 5 million plus children will die over the next 5 years. Do you have a sort of a guesstimate for adults?
It's slightly more than that. If I remember the numbers correctly, it's slightly over 2 million total if you include adults.
So 10 million dead approximately. Dr. Warner, you have a?
There are no good figures on this, but if one considers the related issues such as food security, malnutrition, HIV/AIDS, WHO, for instance, says 50% of the malnutrition deaths in the world are caused by poor water and sanitation. I would say the annual death toll could be 5 to 10 million people from poor water and sanitation and its related impacts in other sectors.
Thank you. Ms. So, World Bank.
Yes, I'd like to talk about the cost in addition to the people deaths, which is that a report that we just did on India alone estimates that in 1 year, India could lose $53 billion due to inadequate sanitation. That's equivalent to about 6% of that country's GDP. A study that we did for East Asia last year estimates 7% of GDP from lack of adequate sanitation. So it's a human cost, but also a significant financial cost.
Thank you. Mr. Sang, am I pronouncing that correctly, or you pronounce it for me, please, sir?
Nyang.
Nyan.
Yes.
Mr. Nyan, thank you. Is your mic on? What is your speculation of loss of life, maybe under your particular NGO? What do you perceive?
Do you mind I give my statement on this? Because I didn't get to me yet.
Oh, he hasn't spoken?
No.
Just a few minutes, as I understand. Thank you. I didn't realize that you hadn't had the opportunity. I yield to you, sir.
Thank you very much.
And pull the microphone up if you would.
Okay. To all these distinguished members here today, I greet you all. I'm honored and pleased to be a part of this very important forum in these hallowed halls. I want to thank personally Chairman Conyers for his inspiring leadership and his effort to bring in clean water and basic sanitation to the world. Around the world today, nearly 1 billion people lack access to clean and safe water. More than 2 billion people lack access to basic sanitation. Most of these people live on less than $2 a day, and I happen to be one of those people before. They are the voiceless and powerless of the world. Water is not simply a humanitarian challenge. It is a threat to our global stability and our global economy. The United Nations recognize the important reality and need to provide to clean water and safe drinking water to the world's population. When they included among their Millennium Development Goals cutting in half the proportion of people living without sanitable access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation by 2015. That may seem like an unrealistic goal to some, but America's history shows that it is possible to make rapid progress to meet these most basic human needs.
Mr. Young, let me
Yes.
ask you to pause for a moment. The chairman has indicated that we'll be coming back.
Okay.
We have votes right now. I just want Mr. Steimers to just say a word of his testimony, but know that you'll have the opportunity, but just give us a gist, if you would, of your content, and then I will say a word or two, and we'll have to pause for votes.
Certainly, ma'am, and thank you very much for your long-standing leadership on this issue. To answer your immediate question...
Is your mic on, sir?
Yes, ma'am, I believe it.
Oh, there it is, closed. That's much better. Thank you.
To answer your immediate question, I look at the death toll in a bit different terms. Imagine, if you will, every single chair in this room occupied by a 5-year-old or less child. Their little legs dangling from that chair. And then imagine another 50 milling shyly near the doors. In the hour that we've been discussing this issue, that many children have died. And to me, that is inexcusable.
It is sinful, it is unpardonable, it is unspeakable. I'm going to let you pause on that because you've shocked us to the point of, let me just say this. Be prepared, or maybe you can quickly answer this, but let me thank, in his absence, Harry Belafonte for the submission of his letter. He has a sentence here that I think is important that suggests that the right to water should be a universal right, not a privilege. And I add to that, not a question, not a maybe, and of course, Dr. Warner, we add in food, nutrition, et cetera, but a universal right. If you have water, you can plant, you can clean, you might even survive a few more days if you don't have food, if you have water. I've seen the firsthand experience of going into the camps in Chad for those who are escaping from Darfur and seeing the preciousness of water, and then being in the camps in Darfur in Sudan and seeing the dearth of water. The Haiti earthquake tragedy, again unspeakable. We were there within a week or so, January 12th, I guess we were there toward the end of January. And the fact, Ms. So, that you mentioned that this was rumoring or rising within that month's time. The fact that we now have a cholera epidemic that does not seem to be containable, it seems to be shame on us. What did we do wrong? And so, Haiti in particular?
I think it was, everybody understands very clearly the need for clean water. But I think there was less of an awareness that, in fact, you need to have adequate sanitation as well.
For the removal of bodily waste.
Yep.
And you're saying we did not have a comparable operational effort. And that's all the NGOs that converge on that. The United Nations, our Mideast friends, China. And what were we thinking? And you notice I say, what were we thinking or not thinking? What was the World Bank thinking?
I think when you're going into, when one does emergency relief operations, we go in and try and meet the most urgent need, which everybody recognizes is water. And what we want to do is to make sure that people recognize that it's water and sanitation. That urgency is both water and sanitation.
We'll have a chance to get back to you. One thing I wanted to leave with you, and I'm just going to let Dr. McGahey finish, is you want us to raise this up to a national level. I, too, support this bill, and I, as well, have worked on water bills, and one of the things that I want to be able to add is to establish a Bureau for Global Water Aid, but now you're hearing me, and I see an amendment coming on this whole sanitation component. But Dr. McGahey, as you answer this question, would you also tell me why we dismantle the internal infrastructure? I want to get on that right now. That seems shameful, and maybe you're telling us that we should have known it in Hurricane Katrina in our own backyard, that we couldn't seem to get ourselves organized as to what we were supposed to be doing. We're sort of moving in the dark, since I have many of those constituents right in my hometown of Houston, and we welcome them. But I yield to you as a final point before we go off to vote.
Thank you very much. Just 3 quick points. The first 2 about Haiti, and the last one about the infrastructure dismantling. On the sanitation and hygiene issue in Haiti, it's impossible for me to tell what we did wrong, but I know the outcome of it. I had a proposal on the desk of the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance to provide comprehensive sanitation and hygiene services in all of the dislocated camps. We couldn't find the right person to review it. When they finally reviewed it 3 or 4 months later, they looked at the dollar figure and just said, that's not going to happen. So that was a direct response to that. The second issue is what we're still doing wrong in Haiti. This number of months after this particular crisis with this particular drama, an hour and a half from Miami, the U.S. government still has no water and sanitation specialist in Haiti. It has no strategy. It has no investment strategy. It has no program. So what we started doing wrong in the beginning, we're still doing wrong today.
And as you close, let me say to you that I would add the word sinful and disgraceful. That we could not pay attention to your proposal. Maybe we would have said, doctor, we just want you to go into the sunset. We're not interested in it, but we reviewed it. And Mr. Chairman, I had individuals still with sanitation components, technology to clean hands in a certain way or however we were doing it, and they can't get their foot in the door. So I'm empathetic and more than sympathetic, but I think we end on this note that Mr. Steimers has said, that as we have been speaking about this, if this room was full and the 50 children at the door, they would be dead. Shame on us. I yield back, Mr. Chairman, temporarily.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll take a recess for 2 quick votes and we'll be back. This committee stands in recess.